We should probably start with the simple things first, like name and birthday. Harold, do you want to start off?
I can start. I'm Harold John Sinder. I was born December 14th, 1931.
Mm-hmm. And where was that?
Champaign, Illinois. And I think the John in my name came from my grandfather, my mother's father.
Okay.
Don't know where the Harold came from.
And what part of Champaign was that?
I presume it was in whatever hospital was there at the time.
Okay.
I really don't know.
He was born on the farm.
Well, thank you for letting me know.
You were around and remember that, do you?
Yep.
All right.
Okay.
And what was your birthday?
Well, July 19th, 1928. I was born on South Mattis Avenue on the Edna Grind farm. And Dad worked there for the month. And we had a house back away from the road. Had 2 rooms upstairs and 2 down.
Okay. Can you give an approximate, location on South Mattis, like with respect to Curtis or one of the other crossroads?
It's halfway between Curtis and Windsor.
Perfect. Okay.
So we were both born there, huh?
Both born there.
Okay.
And let's move on to your parents for the moment. Dad, why don't you start? Just tell me, if you know when and where they were born and who their parents were, and much as you can remember back there about those things.
Dad was born in rural Coal City, Indiana. Can't give you exact date, 1901 or 02. April, I
Yeah, it
believe.
was in April.
Yeah. And I think we've got that. We needed that for your passport application, right? So we can find that easy enough. Okay. And name of parents?
He was Charlie Sinders, and Della. She was Della Clark before she was married. And she married Charlie Sinders. And Grandma Della lived in the same place her whole life. She was born there and died there.
Uh-huh.
And after her and Grandpa married, they took up residence there, and they raised 4 kids.
And their names?
There was Herman, my dad. There was Rex. There was Chester, and there was Bessie.
Okay. And which of them were the oldest? And do you know any of their?
I gave them to you in the right order.
Great. Do you know any of the approximate dates, years of? Okay. And what did Charlie Sinder do back there?
Well, he was primarily a farmer. He did a lot of tiling with a tile spade. And later years, he dug a little coal, took it to town and sold it. And basically, that's the way he made his living after he retired. He retired before he was eligible for Social Security. He hired the farming done for a few years to make him eligible for Social Security. And that's the way they worked it.
Uh-huh. And they had a coal mine on their farm,
Back when I was, I'd say 8 or 10 years old, they had a slope mine. It was approximately 300 yards west of the house, across the gully, and it was a slope mine. And then in the late 30s, or early 40s, he brought a drag line in there and surface mine. They had 2 layers of coal, and one of them was not very deep. After they got it taken care of, they'd make one cut, take the lower vein, and then go on down I'm sorry, they'd take the upper vein, then they'd go on down and take the lower vein. And then they would move over, and it was loaded on coal cars and sent wherever.
Yeah. Do you know approximately how many acres he owned there?
At one time, he owned 40 acres down the Lick Creek bottom. He owned 67 acres on the south side of the road where the house sat. And there was 2 little patches across the road, I would say 10 or 12 acres apiece, one on each side of the road.
Okay, so it was spread out, just, it was broken up by roads and...
Yeah, but
Yeah.
it was all, the end of his lane, it was just across the road with the 2 little patches.
Yeah.
And the other one was down the road about a mile and a half, with
Okay.
40 acres.
Okay. Harold, what do you remember of that place back in Indiana?
Not as much as Charlie does because I was younger. I have some vague memories of the slope coal mine, being down there in, I guess it was a shed where the miners dressed and everything, and seeing, I believe it was a mule pulling the coal up out of the mine. I have a better memory of the later mine, which was the strip mine. I was not aware until Charlie just told me that there were 2 veins of coal there. I know when they were all done strip mining, they ended up with one big cut that was not filled and a big lake back there, and used to be a good place to go catch sunfish.
Oh, yeah?
I remember the outhouse. State of Indiana made everyone build a specification outhouse.
Really now? I had never heard of that there were specifications for an outhouse by state.
It had to have a concrete floor, and then there was a riser, which I think was made out of a clay tile, and a seat on top of that. And as outhouses go, it was a very nice one.
Okay.
There was always a sandbox there that I could play in when I was little.
Not at the outhouse, but
No, not at the outhouse.
Okay, I just got to make that straight there.
Across the driveway from the outhouse.
Yeah. And where was the outhouse with respect to the house?
100 feet away?
Yeah, about
It wasn't really
In
very
what direction?
west.
West. Okay, so it was toward the ravine.
Yeah,
and-
towards the
yeah,
ravine.
Okay.
Yeah. There was
Yeah.
a yard fence and gate, and the gate had a weight on it to shut it. There was a wood gate, and every time you'd open it, there was a chain and a weight on it, and the weight would pull the gate shut. And then right outside of that, Grandpa always had a pile of coal that he burnt in the wintertime, just a pile out there on the ground. And usually he dug that in the summertime himself. When the mines were going, the slope mine, he got it over there. But later on, he had a little place. The coal wasn't too deep, so we'd go there and get a wagon load some morning and bring it and throw it off, and that's the way he got his coal.
Uh-huh.
The garage was also across the same driveway where the outhouse was. And the only car that I remember Granddad having was a Model A Ford Coupe. And the thing I most remember about riding with him is he used the hand throttle. And we'd come to a hill and he'd pull her down a couple notches and get up the top of the hill, and he'd push her up a couple notches to keep the speed the same.
Yeah.
Charlie can probably tell you about him driving through the back of the garage. I know he did.
Now, as I recall, the ravine was pretty close
It
there to
was
the
right
back of
behind
the
it,
garage.
Right behind it. Yeah, he had a Model T to start with, and he always used the hand throttle on it. And he got this Model A, and he came in, tried to hit the brake, but hit the foot feed, went right through the back doors, and his garage was the corn crib. It had 2 sides to a crib, and he drove the car in the middle there. That's what he used for a garage.
Uh-huh. And so how far did the car go?
Went about halfway down and hung up on a tree.
Okay. I'm trying to remember. That ravine was probably, what, 30 feet deep?
Oh, behind 25, 30 feet,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And
There was also a spring down in that ravine where they got their water.
For the livestock.
Yeah, I remember being down in that ravine a few times. I was poking around when we were over there for a reunion or for whatever. And I think I remember the building that was the outhouse, but I'm not sure. Do you know if it was still standing when
Yeah.
I would have seen it?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Um, let's talk about the house itself for a little bit. Uh, you know, what kind of construction was it? What did it look like?
It was
Rooms?
pretty much a square house, 2 stories, had 2 rooms downstairs and closed-in porch, 2 rooms upstairs, 2 bedrooms. It was made out of rough sawed lumber. It was made out of full. There were probably more than 2x4s, and of course it had plaster. You know, it had lath and plaster, and then the floors. They were made out of kind of rough sawed lumber. You could still see the saw marks on them. And the upstairs more so than the downstairs, but I suspect that there was more wear on the downstairs floors, so you wouldn't see it quite as much.
So
And then out on the screen porch, when the weather was good, they always ate all 3 meals out there in the screen porch.
Now that was on the east side,
Northwest corner.
northwest corner.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
There was a
Now,
front porch clear across the front,
Yeah, there was a big front porch.
concrete, and had a concrete top. I mean, the floor was concrete, and it was up almost even with the floor of the house.
yeah. Now you described 2 rooms downstairs. I remember
Well, there was
what to me was 4 rooms. There was the bedroom, which had a bathroom off of it eventually. There was what I thought of as the living room, and then there was the
kitchen.
the kitchen,
Yeah, that's
and
right.
what I thought of as the dining room, which is probably that screened-in porch. Is that?
Well, the kitchen and the dining room in the wintertime was all the same.
Uh-huh.
It was narrowed across the west. Yeah, I forgot about the kitchen there.
Yeah.
And the porch, well, I think it was just part of the house. It was built right in the house, and it just screened in porch.
Uh-huh.
And there was another porch on the other end. I guess it was screened too, wasn't it?
No.
No porch?
Oh, later years there was.
Yeah,
There was a
before
little
you go
on
down
the-
the basement.
Yeah, on the south,
Yeah.
there was a little screened in area. I think they dug a basement and then put a furnace in, but I can't tell you. Back in the 30s.
Yeah,
Originally, it was heated by coal stoves in a kitchen range.
Yeah.
I don't remember the coal stove, so the 30s is probably right for the furnace.
Another one of the most prominent things I remember about that place was the pump outside the door to the west.
Yeah. Well, I went down through one vein of coal, and it was about 36 foot, 36 inch glazed tile set inside. It was hand dug well, and very good water. But it went down through a vein of coal, and then at one time there was a spring up on the hill where the orchard to the south of the house, and they had running water from the spring. But I don't remember that. I remember the pipe, but I don't never remember the spring water being in there. And then they built a cistern out in the yard, and they had a pump on the cistern. That's what they used to do the washing and like wash your hands in the sink and stuff like that.
Yeah, and there was a small hand pump on the kitchen sink.
There was for a while, but later on it was a pressure system.
Okay.
In fact, there was originally, first I remember they pulled the water up out of the dug well with a bucket on a rope. And then they put a regular hand pump, one that stood up about 4 feet high.
Yeah.
Well, before that, they put in a pitcher pump. And then they put in,
What's a pitcher pump?
well, it's one you'd have in the kitchen, and it stands about that high. But there was a tile up on top of the platform, and then a wood cover, and then this pitcher pump sent up there. Then later on, they took this tile off, put the platform down at the concrete platform level, and then they put this other pump there. Then after that, when they put the bathroom and stuff in, they put a pressurized system, run a pipe down it, and put a pressurized system on the dug well too.
Yeah. Do you remember when the bathroom went in approximately?
Oh, I'd say it was mid-40s or later.
Okay.
I don't remember it being there when I left that part of the country in '53, but maybe I just don't remember.
That's about when it was.
Yeah, I'd say probably more likely early '50s.
What memories do you have of that place, Harold?
Well, the same rooms, of course, that Charlie described. I told him the other day, I don't remember ever eating anywhere but the porch, but that's probably because we were there most in the summer. And I remember also I think they both drank coffee, and their way of drinking coffee was to tip the cup over and spill it into the saucer and then drink the coffee out of the saucer.
I see.
That made a big impression on me.
And they always put the spoons in a bowl, and the spoons was always on the table,
True.
and they never had a salt shaker. They always had little containers, little glass containers. You wanted salt, you took your fingers, got it, and then put it on what you wanted to eat.
Okay. That's pretty unique.
As I recall, there was only one mirror in the house, and it was in the living room on the wall. And I have memories of Grandpa shaving there at this mirror, and there was a holder underneath it for a comb. And he had his razor strop there to keep his razor sharp. So I've got a display like that in my house now, a mirror with a comb holder and a razor strap.
Uh-huh.
And I believe that was probably the only mirror in the house, unless there was one upstairs.
I was never in the upstairs in that house. Were you up there much? Could you describe
I
it
don't
a little
remember
bit?
being there a lot, no.
Just slept up there is all.
That was all.
Yeah.
It seems to me there was quite a bit of excess furniture up there, wasn't there?
Oh, some. It was pretty steep stairs too. There was another unique feature on that farm. I would say around 1930, the barn burnt, and they built a barn back, and it was a bank barn, what they call a bank barn. The bottom story, where the livestock stayed, you got to it at ground level. And then the haymow was everything above the front of it. And it went clear up to the top of the barn. There was a huge haymow.
But you could drive right in the haymow.
Right. And that was to the south west, right?
Northwest.
Northwest, yeah, yeah, okay.
And Granddad used to make maple syrup in the spring. He would tap the trees and had 2-gallon buckets. They'd drill a hole in them, drive I forget what they called it. I'll call it a spigot. Drive it in the hole, had a little hook on it. He'd hook the bucket on there, and the sap would run in the bucket. Then he had what they called a sugar camp, where they boiled, had pans in there, and they would boil this down and make maple syrup. And then grandmother lots of times would boil it on down and make maple sugar, and she had some copper molds that she would pour this in, and then it would make, I remember a leaf and some animals and stuff like that. I never liked the stuff. It was a little bitter, and
I don't know if I still have them anywhere, but I had one of the star shapes and one of the sort of oval shaped ones. Yeah.
And then in the fall, they would use the same thing to make sorghum molasses. They had a press that they'd put a horse on and then run the stalks through it and had a pan under it to catch the sap. And then they would boil it down just like you do maple syrup, but you come up with sorghum molasses.
Yeah, the horse went around in circles, right, with this machine.
And where did they do that on the premises?
This was south and a little west of the house.
Okay. So
there was a
sort of up the road past the orchard towards the mine?
Well, not very far.
Yeah.
Just up there a little ways, and there was a flat spot, and that's where it was.
Okay.
Another thing Grandma did with the maple syrup was to dribble it into snow, and you come up with kind of a taffy-like candy. From the, I don't think it was hadn't been boiled quite as long as
Yeah.
it was to make the sugar.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, that was good.
Yeah.
I don't remember who it was, but somebody showed me a sample of doing that one time. Harold, did you have any sort of secret special hangouts over there?
I don't think so. I don't remember any. We used to go back in the woods a lot and hang around back there.
Yeah.
There was a old cemetery south and west of the house. We used to explore that. They almost threw dirt on it when they mined the coal, but they left it. Just a little area there where they didn't throw dirt, and there was a cemetery there. Quite old.
Yeah. Now, was there a road to
No.
that? Okay.
No, that was a bush cemetery where the road is up
Okay.
there.
I remember finding a hollow tree with bees in it and robbing the bees of honey one time.
Oh, yeah?
I was just a far-off observer. Dad and Granddad did it.
Well, they cut the tree down, right?
Yeah, they cut the tree down.
That sounds sort of extreme.
That was on Christmas Day.
Was it?
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
bees, that being that cold, the bees didn't give them any hard time.
It was about 70 that day. It was real warm. Thing I remember is the train used to go probably a half mile behind the house, but at night you could hear it just like it was in the backyard. And down at Worthington, which is about 7 or 8 miles south and east of there, they used to cut the train in half because they had a big hill. So it was coal that come up from north of Evansville, and they would cut the train in half and bring half of it up. They give her too much throttle, you could hear the wheels spin. And then they'd back her off, and then it'd spin again. Well, they'd get it up to Coal City, and they'd put it on the siding, and then they'd go get the other half. And then another thing, they had there was a pipeline that went about 6 or 7 miles north and a little west of them. On a real quiet night, you could hear the pump. It'd go chug, chug,
I had forgotten that.
chug. And the building was still there the last time I was up that road.
A pipeline for pumping.
I don't know whether it was gas or whether it was an oil pipeline. I don't know what it was, but there was a pipeline, and that was a pump for it.
It was a big old one lung engine that made that noise.
Had a big flywheel on it, I suppose. Or?
I think so, yeah. I just remember going by it, and I never knew whether that was the engine making that noise or whether it was a pump. I just it didn't sound to me like an exhaust sound. It was just kind of strange.
Yeah.
But you could hear it. Lay up there in bed and hear it.
Yeah, I remember laying in bed and hearing the trains. Seemed like there were a lot of them.
Did either of you spend significant amounts of time over there, except for visiting for
I used to go where Andy, Dad's cousin, he'd go over sometimes, or they would stay over for a week, and I'd stay a week, and I would either go with them and stay a week, and the folks would come over, or I would go with the folks, and they would stay, however. But I'd stay a week at a time. Sometimes I think you did too.
I did too.
Yeah.
I remember going over with Andy. More I remember coming home than going, but.
And what sorts of things did you do over there? Were you sort of on your own running around, or what?
Well, one time I remember, I was telling you about it here a while back, that Granddad had this little old coal mine where he got his summer's coal, and so I didn't know if I wanted to go, and I said sure. So he had a lane. He was about a half a quarter from the road where his house was. It was a little steep. He'd gone back to the mine and got a bunch of rocks to throw in his lane, and they was pretty big, and it was rough. Anyway, we got a single deck wagon, and he loaded 2 or 3 kegs of powder in the back of it. And remember, my mother standing in the yard. She didn't want me to go, but I got to go anyway. Well, we had no more than started down that lane. Them kegs of powder upset and rolled up under the seat where we were sitting. And Mom thought they was going to blow up. But Granddad said, no. He said, the caps are up here between us. And he said, it takes a cap to set it off. So I remember went over there, and he took an auger, dug a hole, turned it, big auger, had a T-handle on it, dug a hole, tamped her full of powder, put a cap in her, put about 2 feet of fuse on it, and fuse burned a foot a minute. And Granddad, he was kind of short, but he took long steps. But this particular time, he had me behind a tree, and he lit that thing, and he was taking long, fast steps. But she went off and blowed enough coal loose that we got a load of coal and took back home by noon.
The little town of Coal City had a croquet court right downtown. Had wooden bumpers around it. They played croquet more like you might play pool, seemed to me. They didn't have long-handled mallets. They had like a hammer handle in the mallet.
They made their own mallets.
And they played some very, very significant games down there.
Serious, huh?
Yeah, it was serious. So I remember going down there with Granddad, and after a while he wanted to know if I wanted some ice cream. And I couldn't have been more than probably 4 or 5. And we go into a cafe or whatever was there, and he buys a quart of ice cream, which at that time came in like a brick-shaped container. And he takes out his pocket knife and cuts it in half and hands me half.
Just bare?
Yeah, with a spoon. And I ate and ate and ate till I was almost sick. I didn't even come close to eating a pint of ice cream. But he helped me.
Another thing about the mine, they had what they call a donkey. He was real short. He would pull the coal up to the slope. And then they had a horse, and the horse would pull that coal up the slope. And they would have a ton in each car would have a ton. And but the donkey, he only pulled it to the slope. And then there was a little room dug out. He'd turn off in that room, and the horse was already in that room. So then they'd bring the horse, and when they got it up at the top, they'd turn the horse loose. He'd walk down and get in that room on his own. And then the man had to let the car down. He had to go in front of it with his back against it and let it down. He didn't let it go fast. He had to let it down easy. But and when they got it up the top, they put it on some rails, and they had hooks on them. And then it was on a hinge and had a big long pole on it, and that's the way they dumped it. They would run that up to where them wheels hit them hooks so it wouldn't run off. And then they'd reach back and get that pole and raise it up and dump it. And then the end gate come loose on it. I mean, I don't know how they did it. Evidently there was a pin or something. They'd open that before they started tipping it. But one man could tip her up and dump the coal out of it.
They did there.
Another thing I remember about the mine, the trucks, a lot of them would take the bodies off the school buses and build old rough lumber beds on them, no windshield, and that's the way they'd haul coal in the summertime. Then when it comes school time, they'd put the school bus bodies back on them, and that's the way they would haul coal in the summer.
Let's talk a little bit about the orchard south of the house. I don't remember what kind of fruit was up there.
Mostly apples. I think there was a plum tree, but it was mostly apples.
I think he probably had a peach tree or two too, but you're right, it was mostly apples.
Yeah.
I know he had some summer apples because I got some one time when I came back from California.
Yeah.
And that would have been in probably July or August.
And he used to put apples in barrels and bury the barrel about halfway, and then put a lot of straw around it and keep those apples up into the winter. Also done potatoes that way. Out in the garden, they'd had wooden barrels, they'd dig a hole and then put straw in the hole around the barrel, and then they would put straw up around the barrel, and that's the way they'd keep the apples. Also made cider. He had a cider mill out there, and they pressed cider.
And where was that located?
It was out in the orchard.
Okay.
I remember the day they got that. They wouldn't run anything through it. The rolls were too slick. So they took her to a welding shop, and he put some beads across it. The apples would just lay there, and they wouldn't go in them.
Wouldn't go through.
So you had to turn it by hand, and then you stuck a pole in a wheel up there, and there was a screw, and you had them slatted. The pulp that's what you call that, you ground. The pulp would go in these, they were basket types with they were boards about that wide, and then you had cracks between them. And if I remember right, you put a sack in there.
Yeah, you put some muslin cloth sack in there.
And then it had a top that just fit, a round top. And then you took this screw and squeezed it out of it. And it sloped, and then you had a bucket sitting on the end of it to catch it.
So was that for their own use, or did they sell that?
I think it was for own use. Of course, they made their own vinegar that way. And they were pretty self-sufficient. They had their own chickens and had their own cows for a long time. I mean, up until later years. And didn't take a whole lot to, they were pretty self-sufficient.
Yeah. I want to go back and clarify something that we talked about right at the beginning, and that was your grandmother's name. It was
Clark.
Clark.
Della Clark.
Della Clark. I somehow remember the name Zora Dell. Is that?
I have heard that.
I do too.
Maybe that was her real name.
I remember people calling her Zora Dell, I think.
Yeah. I think I've seen it written somewhere, and I can't remember.
Well, there's that Clark history.
Yeah, that may be
it.
it. Yeah. I guess there's one thing that struck me as a bit inconsistent here. It was Charlie Sinders with an S on the end, and that's not your name.
Well, Dad dropped the S.
Oh, okay. And when did he do that?
I have no idea.
My understanding is he dropped it the day he got married. That's what he put on his marriage license.
Okay. So it wasn't a mistake, it was intentional?
No, it was intentional.
Yeah, okay.
That's what Mother told me was the situation.
Uh-huh. Okay. And so I would take it that he moved here and then met her.
There's a little controversy about that. Granddad told Ruth, my wife, that him and his dad rode up from Texas on horses. I've said something to Aunt Bessie a couple of times, and she said no.
So you're talking about Granddad, how he met
Well,
Dell.
that's the way he got into the Indiana.
Okay.
That's what he told Ruth.
Mm-hmm.
But Aunt Bessie says no, but she's never came up with another answer.
Uh-huh.
So, I would think she would probably know, but Ruth says that he told her one time that they came up from Texas on a horse. So, that's all I know about the story.
Okay.
You were asking about how Dad
Yeah.
got
right.
to Illinois and
Let
met
me,
Mom. Again, Charlie probably knows more than I do, but I know he worked on the railroad for a while. Was that in Indiana?
Yeah.
That was.
I was totally unaware of that.
Is that right?
Worked on the Monon Railroad as a section hand.
And I've never heard of the Monon either.
Well, it was.
It was a going railroad at the time.
And it was in that area, or did he have to?
He worked around Bloomington's where he worked out of. I don't know when or how long, but he did work on the section. And, Uncle Rex did too at one time, but I don't know if it was both the same time.
Yeah. Now, I guess before we get into the more recent stuff, well, I guess you've already told me you don't know his exact birthday, but we've got it somewhere. So, any other things that you know about that he did in Indiana before he moved?
He spent time in Iowa on a farm there, and if you know, speak up, Charlie. I don't know if he was in Illinois and then Iowa and then back to Illinois, or if he went to Iowa.
I think he went to Iowa first.
That's what I thought.
He was out in northwestern Iowa, and I've heard him name the town, but I don't remember it. Offered to take him out there in later years, but he didn't want to go. I said, would you like to go out there? He said no, so we never went.
He worked on a dairy farm there.
Uh-huh.
Go ahead.
One of the stories he told was that another hired hand came to work at the farm and told the farm owner he'd do anything that the farm owner wanted him to, but he would not milk a cow because the cow wouldn't let him. He said, you know, cows hate me. They just won't let me milk them. So the farmer, he didn't believe that, so he said, show me. The other guy sits down and starts milking, and the cow kicks the crap out of him. And this just keeps happening. And finally the farmer said, oh, okay, we'll find something else for you to do. Dad said the guy told him later he'd put a pin in the bill of his hat and lean over and poke the cow with a pin to make her kick.
I take it he didn't like milking?
No, he didn't like milking. Dad also had a story about the railroad that I guess they must have stayed in the barracks or something.
Stayed in a work car.
Okay. There was one guy in the crew who they'd go out and buy candy, and he'd eat all the candy. So they fixed him up one day by mixing about half and half candy and X-Lax. Took care of that little habit.
I remember, I think they were living in Fisher, or Foosland at the time, and I saw a backpack which had some sort of something in it that looked like a map holder, and I was always curious about where that came from.
Oh, a what?
It was a kind of a knapsack backpack thing. It almost looked to me like it might have been, you know, something World War I vintage or something like that.
I think that was found along a road. I don't think Dad even found it. I think a neighbor found it and gave it to Dad.
Okay.
I know what you're talking about now.
Okay.
It was khaki.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, that's what that was.
Okay.
The way Dad got to Illinois, he came out to shuck corn. And I don't know whether the first place he worked was for Fred Klein or Ted Rayburn. He worked for one or the other of them, shucking corn. And
what location approximately?
well, Rayburn lived out on 150 out about halfway to Mahomet.
Okay.
And Fred Klein lived right at the end of Church Street, right the other side of Mattis. There was a farm right out there, and that's where Fred Klein lived. And Dad worked there for a while. Then him and Mother met, and they married. And then he got a job down there on the grind place on South Mattis.
Okay. Right after or shortly after they married?
Right afterwards, yeah.
Right afterwards.
Yeah.
Okay.
1927.
Okay. So you don't remember the year he came?
No, I don't.
Yeah, okay. Or whether there were multiple years in there that he was over here?
Well, I'd say there's 3 or 4 that he was over here.
That was the
Okay.
impression I had, but I don't have any exact numbers.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about your mother. Do you know her birthday or?
Well, it was less than a year before Dad's.
A year before? Okay.
She said she was boss for part of a year.
Right.
So maybe 1900, maybe 1901.
I think about 1902, wasn't it?
1902.
1 or 2.
I think too, but I'm not
Oh,
sure.
okay. So he was younger.
No, she was
No,
older.
she was
She was
older.
older. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And what was her family like? What can you tell me about them?
Well, her great-grandmother came over from Germany. Her name was Schrader. And came over from Germany. And then my grandmother was Mary Schrader.
Yeah. Do you have any idea of the approximate date?
No. No, I don't. I believe I remember her, but I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But I was very young when she died.
Yeah. Any idea what part of Germany?
No. No. And Granddad, John Knopfs, there were a lot of Knopfs down around Sidorus, so I always figured that they came from down that way. And he owned 40 acres down Sidorus, and then he owned 160, which was developed in about 50, started in 1958 or 9.
Yeah.
So you're talking land in what's now the city of Champaign.
West
Yeah,
Champaign,
right.
and it was Holiday Park.
Okay.
Ozer Weller took 40 acres a year. And
So up until what, a month ago, Linda was probably living on land that he owned. Would that be right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right. There was 160 acres there, and it's right west of Centennial.
Okay. Do you know when they moved to town?
Granddad, grandmother.
I don't remember the farm. That's why I'm asking.
It was quite early because Granddad was cultivating corn. He was struck by lightning, and he gave me a watch that he was wearing, and it looked like somebody touched the back of it inside with a welding rod. But it was supposed to incapacitate him enough that he couldn't farm. Now, he always seemed pretty capable to me, but that's the reason they left the farm. And when they left it, I would say Mother was a late teenager. And they had an old house. Then Granddad's brother, Rudy, was a carpenter. And I can't put a time on it, but Rudy built them a new brick home.
Okay. And do you know where that was?
310 East Clark
310.
in Champaign.
All right.
So that was really close to the center of. It was close to campus. What's now campus, right?
Well, it was north of the old Burnham Hospital.
Yeah.
A ways.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. There's a flower shop there on University Avenue. It's close to that.
And do you know, is that house still there, or?
The house is on 2nd or 3rd Street north of University Avenue right now. On the
Oh, it
east.
was moved.
Yeah,
They
I
moved
was,
it.
I was amazed they were able to move that brick house, but they did.
When did that occur?
I don't know when it happened. I do remember that they sold it for $10,000. And the shape it was in when they sold it, it would probably have brought 150 today. I mean, it was a nice brick
Oh
home.
yeah, it had beautiful hardwood floors. Nice home.
And so yes, they sold it and then moved somewhere, or?
No, this was after.
This was
after.
after.
Oh,
their
okay.
death.
After
Okay.
grandmother died, and after Granddad couldn't stay there no more.
Okay. And when did she die? Do you remember?
1941.
41.
Mhm.
Okay.
The reason I remember is 40 or 41, because Uncle Fred Brown bought a new car, and he asked Grandpa if he minded if he got the new car, because all he had was a truck. He wouldn't know if he minded if he went ahead and took the new car so they'd have something to drive in the funeral procession instead of the truck. It was either a 40 or a 41. I think maybe it was a 40. But she died February, early March.
Okay. And then John, he wasn't able to stay there, and so where did he?
He was there for a while, and then he had some mental problems,
Mhm.
and he spent his I'd say last 10 years up in Kankakee.
Okay.
He was in and out of there a couple of
Yeah.
times. He came to live with us for a period of time. I don't know how long, but he did stay out on the farm with
Yeah.
us for a period of time.
That was there on Mattis, or was that?
No, this was a Stewart farm where
Okay.
we lived in.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I have a vivid memory of him going back to the state hospital because to make it legal and everything, the sheriff had to come get him. And, that was pretty sad for all of us.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember when he was staying there, I was big enough to drive a tractor and I was working a lot at night. He'd stay up, come out and open the gates to the pasture. Heard me coming. He'd stay up and come out and open the gates so I didn't have to get off him. But yeah, he died in 1955, in July or August of 1955, so he died.
Well, how many children did they have?
Ooh.
Well, Howard
Make
was
it
the
count.
oldest. Howard was the oldest.
Then there was Mother. Then there was Opal. Then Elma. Then Marie. And Helen.
Helen was last, right?
Okay.
I didn't count.
We'll figure that out later. So how much do you remember about living on South Mattis, and when did you leave there?
Well, I remember a lot of it. I left there, I believe I was 9 years old. And,
Yeah, I was 5, and in the first grade I had just started school.
And where did you go to school?
There was a school,
Windsor and Mattis,
Okay.
northeast corner,
what was it, about half a mile or
half a mile.
from where we lived?
Equity,
Equity School.
Equity. And
And there
one
was
room?
one room. It's right catty corner across from where the Christie Clinic building is now.
Mm-hmm.
There was a little creek ran alongside the school, and some of the boys got in trouble for smoking under the bridge. They let me have one puff, as I recall, and I did a lot of coughing.
Remember we lived there in the wintertime, we used to have to, the road would get so muddy, we'd leave the car at the schoolhouse. And then, of course, you'd walk home after you did that. And then if you wanted to go to town, you'd hook the horses up to a wagon. Take the wagon down to the schoolyard, tie the horses to a tree, and go to town, then drive the horses back home. And a couple of winters, it was so bad you couldn't get a car down that road.
My memory is at the time we moved, we had to haul all the furniture with the horse and wagon up there. No?
No, I don't believe so.
Maybe I remember another time then.
Don't believe so. Because it was, no, they backed the trucks up right to the house.
We moved in March, didn't we?
Yeah.
And what year was that? 37?
39, I believe.
39. Okay.
38 or 9. I'm not sure. One or the other.
Okay. And what was the reason for the move?
The son on the farm that Dad was, where he was hired, he got old enough to take over the farm. Jewel.
Okay. And so how did your father find work?
He'd just hear of jobs and go ask for them.
Uh-huh.
And
And so you then moved to the Stewart place then?
Yes.
Or,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Dad had a opportunity. Mr. Thompson, he was a professor at the university, asked Dad if he would like to rent his farm. And it was back right after the Depression. And Dad was kind of a pessimist. And he told him no, he didn't want to rent it. And so a year or so later, Mr. Thompson asked him why. He said, well, I couldn't get the money. And he said, why didn't you tell me? I'd have let you had it. But that's where Orville Westfall moved. Orville Westfall moved there, and him and Dad became very good friends. They neighbored back and forth and butchered together. And but he had the opportunity, but he was never optimistic about much.
Mm-hmm.
And,
The Grimes farm had an orchard too, and a cider mill.
yeah.
And I think I probably might have earned my first money there.
I did too.
We were picking up apples to go to the cider mill, and Charlie kept telling me I wasn't doing my share and that I shouldn't get paid. So when it came time to get paid, I wouldn't take the money. I think it was like 15 cents, and Mom took it for me from Mrs. Grimes.
Dad ran a thrashing machine there, had a thrashing ring, and had a 22-inch Avery thrashing machine and a Twin City tractor. And then the restacks also stored a thrashing machine in the machine shed. Originally it was made for a steam engine, for a thrashing machine and a steam engine on the other side. But after the steam engines went out, they rented it out to the restacks, and they kept their thrashing machine in there.
Yeah, Dad had an accident with the horses there too, right?
Right.
He was operating a hay rake. What do you call that kind of a hay rake?
A dump rake.
It had fingers like this, and then when you get the hay, you dump it. And the horses bolted and ran away. Dad fell underneath the machine and darn near lost his ear.
I can still remember sitting out there, well, south of the well house, and the doctor working on him. He fell down in there, and it just kept rolling him. The horses ran off with it.
He got a lot of stitches.
But, I was on 2 or 3 runaways myself, both of them on hay racks. It's quite a wild ride.
I can imagine.
I remember breaking in a new horse there.
Yeah.
They hooked the new horse up with another one, and then they took a rope and tied the wagon wheel on the new horse's side so it couldn't turn. So he had to really pull hard. And ran this horse around the barn lot there for a while until he got used to being in harness.
Yeah, it was always interesting breaking horses. My Uncle Gilbert, that was Marie's husband, he used to buy broncos out of Dakotas. And he always had a hay rope tied to the bridle. The old horse would get acting up, he'd jerk that hay rope right hard, and just had it on that one horse. And but he worked that bronco, and I remember he had some wild times too. Then out on the farm, when Uncle Gilbert farmed it after him and Marie got married.
That's the Knopfs.
Yes.
Yeah.
The 160 acres.
Uh-huh.
There was a golf course right north of it, and they used to knock golf balls over in the cornfield and stuff like that. Uncle Gilbert, when he plowed corn, he always had a little bucket hanging on the cultivator. He'd find a golf ball and put it in the bucket. So he always kept us supplied with golf balls.
Yeah, we had plenty of golf balls.
And what use did you find for those?
We used to hit them with a ball bat.
Or tear them up.
So, could you describe the Grimes place a little bit? You know, the layout of the buildings and so forth.
There was 120 acres on the west side of the road, and there was 20 acres of buildings and pasture
On the east side.
on the east side, and then behind that there was 40 acres. Today the 40 acres has been developed. Dr. Lowe bought the 20 acres about 2 or 3 years ago for $35,000 an acre. The 120 is divided up among Jewel Grine, who still lives south of Philo. He got 60 of it. And then Opal, Jewel's sister, Gillen, she got the other 60. And Ruby got Ruby was never married until later years, and she got the 40. And I think the 20. Now there was another daughter, Pearl, but they got in financial trouble, and Mrs. Grine bailed them out, and they didn't get anything. Her husband was kind of a deadbeat, and so she bailed them out and said, "You don't get nothing." And then Granddad's farm, it got left to the four. It got left to Uncle Howard, my mother, Opal, and Marie. And Opal got her 40 taken first. She bought 240 acres, traded and bought at Ludlow. Then Uncle Howard, they took his, and he bought 120 of Collison. And then they took Mother's, and she bought 160 down by Murdoch. And then Marie was the last. They took her 40 last, and they bought a farm over east of Urbana. Bought some land over there. They still farmed. I think they'd bought some over at Bonneville too. They farmed both places. But they ended up over at Bonneville. I think they had 120 and an 80 over at Bonneville.
So I didn't hear Helen in there.
Helen got the 40 at Sidoris.
Okay.
It was left in trust for Helen.
Okay.
And Uncle Howard managed it till he found out he had terminal cancer, and then I managed the trust until Helen died, and then we disposed of it.
Yeah. So I didn't. I wasn't aware of the 40 at Sidoris. So, do you know when that was acquired? Was that?
No, I don't. I do know it was mortgaged a lot of times, maybe for $200, because the abstract or the deed, I looked through it any number of times. I mean, it was mortgaged, and I don't even remember by who. But
After Helen's death, that 40 went to the grandchildren.
it was disposed of, and the grandchildren got it split up. There was 7 of us.
So that does sort of lend some credence to the idea that the Noth family came from Sidoris.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Diedrichs farmed that 40 acres down there for years, and when they quit farming, then Ernie Schroeder farmed it, and then when Melvin got old enough, Melvin farmed it, and Melvin's son ended up buying it. So it was sold in 1995, I believe.
Okay. Well, how about could either one of you describe the layout of the farmstead there on South Mattis? You know, the buildings and their relationship to one another.
Well, there was this machine shed out there where the thrashing machines were stored to the north. On the north side of the property, there was a hedge for a quarter mile. And then there was a machine shed. Then there was a hog house. Then there was the house. And it was a little ways off the road. South of the house, there was a corn crib, a cow barn, a horse barn, and another little house that Pearl lived in for a while. After she left there, it was made into a shop. And I remember back 1936 or thereabouts, chinch bugs eat all the corn, so Dad went out and planted a bunch of lima beans. Didn't have any corn that fall, so he took a hay rack out there and threw the lima bean vines on the hay rack, put them in the corn crib. That winter he would drag them vines into the shop, and he'd burn the pods and the vines, and he'd haul them, then we'd take them down and sell them. Sold them for 25 cents a quart.
And where did you live out on that?
We lived on the house on the back of it.
That
House
was
in the back.
kind of on the back side.
Okay. Okay.
There was another 2 tool sheds just south where we lived that Dad made into one. I'd love to get in there because Dad and I put some old horse equipment up there. I was just a kid, but took all the bolts out of it, put the bolts back in the holes, tied them up in a bundle of bale wire and put them on a shelf, and I bet they're still there. But
That house had a very unique well with a pump it had a crank on the pump.
This was a cistern.
Is that the main house or the one you?
The one we lived in. Yeah, it was a cistern. It wasn't the pump we drank out of, but it was out behind the house, and it was in a metal enclosure. You turned the crank, and the water came up in cups, and as the cup went over the top, it dumped the water out. And that always fascinated me. I like to get water out of the cistern. Did we drink water from the main house pump then?
We had to carry our water.
That's why I thought we
Yeah.
carried water.
I don't think it was cups. Was it cups on it? I thought it was little rubber things that come up through a pipe.
It might have been. I don't know.
I think it was on a chain, and I think when that would come up, it would get water in the pipe, and then this would just bring it up and dump it. The faster you turned, the more water it brought up.
They still make it. I've seen fairly new ones.
Out in Colorado, there's some wells out there you drink out of. I've seen wells like that.
Well, we've about used an hour tape, so we got to stop.